Begin tonight with something that you will not hear about on other television networks. You know how I know that? Because I've worked at other television networks. That's right. As the only network news anchor who happens to be Hispanic, I've always wanted to share with viewers the story of U.S. interventions in Latin America. What the United States has done in Latin America, right? It's important. It's newsworthy. First of all, let's start with El Salvador. 1940s. The United States and Great Britain bankroll and control the coffee plantations there in El Salvador. When Salvadoran citizens elect politicians who try to take back control of their resources, what do? We send in the Navy and essentially crush them. In 1960, some guy named Fabio Castillo, installed by the U.S., actually goes to the U.S. Congress and he thanks us for facilitating a coup that gave him power over an elected president. And all that was before the Salvadoran death squads that most of you know about that killed 80,000 people in the 1980s. Now let's talk about Honduras. Going back to the 1920s and 30s again, the U.S. installs a dictator. The guy's name is Manuel Bonilla. He gives away most of the country's assets and resources to two companies, American Foods, now known as the Dole Food Company, and United Fruit Company. You know about them. They're now known as the Chiquita brand or the Chiquita banana brand. U.S. companies, with the help of the CIA, end up owning more than 1 million acres of this nation's absolute best lands, most of it not even paid for. They divvy up the rest with global companies, and by the 1980s and today, Honduras is one of the poorest and most dangerous countries in the world. Guatemala now, 1950s. The country elects a very popular guy. His name is Jacobo Arbenz. Arbenz is this tall, blonde dude, right? He argues that Guatemalans should at least own part of their own lands, not all the American companies like American Fruit. So what he asks for is a fair distribution. When they hear about this, the CIA organizes a coup and removes this guy from office. Then, with the help of the U.S. Green Berets, they bribe military officials, they take over the radio stations, they distribute millions of anti-government leaflets and replace Arbenz with a general who supports the United Fruit Company. The CIA's actions ignite a civil war that lasts 40 years in Guatemala and results in the deaths of more than 150,000 people. Let's talk about Chile. Chile, 1970s. After the democratic election of President Salvador Allende, President Nixon orders his removal by declaring an unofficial economic war. The CIA ignited a coup to remove Allende, and he was killed during that attack, some would say assassinated. The U.S. put in his place a military dictatorship led by a dude named General Augusto Pinochet. Not a good guy. With the support of the CIA, Pinochet is accused of killing more than 3,000 of his political opponents, 1,000 of which have never even been found. Let's do the Dominican Republic, shall we? 1960s. The U.S. sends in 42,000 troops to invade the country, which resulted in the deaths of more than 3,000 Dominicans. The United States, who had been interfering in Santo Domingo elections since the 1900s, this time attacks some guy named Juan Bosch. Juan Bosch is a writer, an intellectual. He ran for president and he won in what was described by most of the world press as a fair and free election. But the U.S. fears that this guy Bosch might be a little too friendly with Fidel Castro because they've been heard talking on the phone. So they send in the Marines to have him removed and replaced with 3 generals chosen by the CIA. You see, events like these that I'm describing now, it's happened in Panama, happened in Colombia, happened in Guyana, happened in Cuba, and in many other countries, and still have continued to occur. We're not saying this because we want to be hypercritical of our own country that we love. We say this because we think this is something we should know. Dan Kovalik is an attorney and a professor at the University of